forget about that. It's time to talk about Star Trek.
I love Star Trek.
I'm going to leave everything out previous to that part where I said forget about that, so people are wondering what we were talking about.
They'll never know. Mwahaha.
You'll never know that you're my hero for talking about Star Trek all the time with me on Fridays. I get really excited about this.
Yeah, we typically have like a very brief discussion over the course of a week about what vague idea or specific topic we want to cover here in this Subspace transmission, a We Were Gamers podcast production.
A plus. A plus.
Branding on point. And our topic today, we came to, and then I had a lot of fun looking up and thinking of my ideas about this. Do you want to introduce it here?
Sure. It's my vision of this topic started and because of what a lot of people complain about. With newer movies, the ships tend to look less crude. Now, I'm not going to say more advanced because the newer shows have done a decent job, and even the newer movies have done a decent job of trying to make the ships not look advanced past the original series or the later series. But for a while, they looked, like more clean, more special than maybe some of the original show did. So I wanted to talk about ship design. And that's not really where I headed with my notes eventually of like, that's a topic that a lot of people talk about. So eventually we started talking about more general ship design and just Star Trek's view of what it's like to travel through space in giant tin cans.
Yeah, it's pretty surprising how, if you go and look at like the entirety of every ship that was designed for Star Trek, right? And of course there's like, I'm sure I haven't even seen all of them because there's tons of stuff that was like, oh, only in this one scene or this one episode of the original series that you found this weird thing. But you can kind of like divide the various factions out there into like groups with like their own design aesthetic, right?
Very clearly, yes.
Star Trek or Starfleet and the sort of the United Federation of Planets kind of has its design theme over here on this side.
Right.
The Klingons kind of have their own thing over there. The Romulans have a thing that's kind of like the Klingon thing, but like still different. The Borg have this like, mechanical and primary shapes thing.
Very geometric, yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting that they, I guess in order to kind of like give the viewer a quick like, hey, who's this? That immediately by looking at it, right?
Yeah, do you think that's just from repetition, or do you think that's from... I definitely agree the Borg probably... Their mathematical design of a ship, is like, well, it's in space. It doesn't need to do anything. It's a cube or a circle.
So, like, actually, the Borg have the best... If you want to, like, go by science or whatever, the Borg actually have the best sort of ships because there isn't air in space. You don't have to be sleek or have, like, flowing lines or any of this stuff because none of that matters in space. You can literally take a square and accelerate it, and it will go just as fast in space as something with, some cool design that looks like wings and all this stuff.
And despite everything of the races and factions all having unique ship designs, the Bajorans and the Dominion and the Federation, and they all are so unique that they stand apart from each other, minus a few one-off ships. They still, not a single one of those factions iterates on what I would call general space design. So if you watch Babylon 5 or The Expanse or Battlestar Galactica or any of the other kind of modernized versions of space shows, everyone is in the submarine tube, right? Like it's a rocket, so it looks kind of like a rocket still in space.
Yeah, everyone has sort of stuck with the idea of spaceships are just regular Earth ships, but in the stars somehow.
Then there's, Battleship Yamato, which is literally a battleship in space.
Right. Yeah, and they don't even try. It's just look, man, this is just a ship. We took the flight deck and everything.
It's kind of smart, right? Because then you could land it in the water.
Yeah, sure. I guess
if it didn't have a hull puncture.
Yeah, or you didn't somehow melt on re-entry. Obviously, when you start to examine ship design in Star Trek, and really almost any show from a serious scientific standpoint, it doesn't hold up, right?
Yeah, you would need something very compact and smaller to try and make it through atmospheric re-entry, and almost nothing in Star Trek would survive re-entry.
And even with futuristic materials that somehow don't exist and can't exist, the shapes and stuff that you use to build those ships make no sense whatsoever. You would never do something that way if you were trying to achieve the things that these ships say that they're doing, right?
Yeah, and one of my quibbles actually lines up with one of these things, and I have very few complaints about Star Trek ship design because you have to suspend your disbelief, and once you do that, you kind of enjoy what you're looking at, right? Wow, these are aesthetically pleasing, actually, right? And beyond the normal, oh, okay, cool, it's a spaceship with a lot of guns on it, sci-fi look. The Battlestar Galactica is a beautiful ship in sci-fi because it's iconic, but it's not really a looker.
Right.
You gotta look at it and it looks like a potato.
Yeah, and it suffers from the submarine thing like you were talking about before, right?
Yeah, like the Wing Commander Tiger Claw, the same problem.
Ooh, that's a deep pull. I don't know that everyone's going to know that one.
Okay, but it's the same design of a ship because they're both aircraft carriers, and they were
exactly.
What if we took a submarine and turned it into an aircraft carrier?
And we put this big long runway down the middle, and then everyone flies out this end, and on this other end we have torpedoes, but they're space missiles. That kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of sci-fi falls into that.
Sure. Even games, right?
Totally.
What is that game? Homeworld. All the ships in Homeworld look like that. Flotilla. A lot of the designs in Into the Breach. What's the other game that they made?
FTL.
FTL. Yeah, even the FTL designs, they had infinite space to make FTL designs. They could have done whatever they wanted, and they're all still kind of blocky.
Yeah. It is both a trope and a kind of an expectation of the audience that the ships kind of look like ships in some level.
Yeah. Even Star Wars.
Totally. Star Wars actually has a lot of also big problems with its scientific side of its space stuff. But yeah, they're absolutely in that same vein.
Here's the big triangles versus the big blobs.
Right. When in fact, in space, there's really no reason to not just make everything big cubes or rectangles or something.
Right.
Because there really is no, there's no difference in how it moves in space. It's all just gravity affecting it. So it's going to affect it the same, whether it looks like a sleek, cool fighter jet or whether it looks like a giant block. Obviously there is some benefit to having it look nice on the outside, but no one's going to care in space. So you might as well just make it big and, imposing.
Yeah. And unlike the Kelvin timeline, original Star Trek did say that ships were assembled in space. So you can kind of just throw out everything when you watch Star Trek and enjoy the designs, right? They're not meant to be on planets, whatever. They can do whatever they want.
They do put them on planets occasionally, and we'll just ignore that.
The Enterprise D doesn't do very well when it hits a planet, so we're good.
Nope, and Voyager doesn't do great either.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so back to Star Trek. We've accomplished that Star Trek sets itself apart with ship design. They're fully and wholly unique, I think.
Okay.
The most iconic of ship designs being the Federation nacelles, maybe?
Yeah, I was going to say, you get an interesting design theme between the different races, I guess, in Star Trek, right? The nacelles are the one that you think of for the Federation, right? The tube thing, which kind of like glows and flashes when they go into warp.
Sure.
That's always kind of separated a bit from the main body of the ship by either little fins or little, like little parts of the ship that are kind of poking these nacelles out away from the main ship for whatever reason.
Yeah, I assume, and I did not do enough research, but I believe in the past, I think in Next Generation, they talk about the nacelles need to be out there because they're so volatile. And
they're the ones generating that field
right.
that they use
so
to go through warp or whatever.
Right. What's interesting to me about that conceit is that the nacelles have to be like this to generate a warp field or whatever. And and how many other races' ships don't have nacelles? Right? Like, if that's the way it has to be, how can the Klingon bird of prey fly? Or how can, the Romulan ships all have nacelles, but...
Yeah, the Romulan ships have those, like, big wing-like things up on the sides.
Maybe
and so do some of the Klingon ships do, too. But, yeah, I mean, the bird of prey, the old-school one, doesn't.
Yeah, Cardassian ships maybe don't.
Not really. The Borg obviously don't, but then they use transwarp.
That's true. They don't use warp.
As though, like, that's just a hand-wavy way to get around that problem.
Sure. So, it's interesting that they created this trope of needing a nacelle to be part of the design so that, the original ship still stands okay. And then they're somewhat limited in the Federation, at least, mantra to creating these nacelles off to the side, even if they're part of the body, like on the Defiant. It's kind of cool. And it makes such a iconic thing. You can just show anybody the Enterprise and they'll know,
The design specifically of the original Enterprise and the Enterprise D also from the Next Generation is because of how popular those things were in their time, kind of influenced everything else in sci-fi to some level, in that everyone now associates that thing as that's a spaceship. That's what spaceships look like.
And it's funny too because the original Enterprise is probably even the most horrible of Federation designs.
You look at it, compare it with like the Enterprise D and some of the stuff that came later, and you can really see that like, hey, this was made for a TV show on a budget.
Less the quality of it and more like, I wonder where the weak point of this starship is.
I mean, you don't want to talk about that stuff. It's the same in every single Federation ship.
They got a little better towards the end, like we'll talk, maybe this is the time to talk about it, but, the Federation has become the nacelles are still there, but now they are the flat ships.
Right. I was going to say that over time, the Federation morphed from having this kind of two-level with the nacelle prongs thing with like a main saucer and like the lower area down below. They kind of, you could see over time the ship design kind of evolving as the saucer and engineering sections got closer to each other until they kind of just became a flat thing.
Yeah. And we're almost to the point that they've retconned it because Discovery, I think, is a flat ship, and a whole bunch of other of the later older ships, right? Like when they've gone back, the old ships are still flatter. I think that the NXs are flat as well.
Right, all of those from original like Enterprise are. Is Discovery in the canonical? Prime
Discovery
timeline?
Is Prime, which is, I'm very curious once we start watching Discovery, and I'm sure that will be part of this show, to see why Klingons have changed again.
Yeah. Where in the timeline does it fall? Do we know? I don't know.
Post Archer, pre-Kirk, because they're adding Pike this season, by the way. This upcoming season 2 is going to be Captain Pike.
Okay, so they're like right there then.
Yeah,
right
it's
before Kirk.
Real close to the original Enterprise. It's about a decade, I think. So, But the Discovery is a flat ship, the NX-01 is a flat ship, the Enterprise E is a flat ship. So the Federation design has somewhat been retconned away from the original Enterprise, and yet if you showed someone the Discovery or the Enterprise E, they would still know, right?
Totally.
And it's cool. It's cool in a way because also the Enterprise 1701, when you look at like new art of the 1701, the Prime one, not the Kelvin one, the red nacelles, not the blue nacelles, has also started to become flatter in newer art.
Oh, interesting. You mean like the artists' renditions of the...
Yeah, they're much tighter. The nacelles are closer to the saucer and much less high up and stocky and a little bit flatter.
Than if you go back and actually watch the show.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it is striking how they... and, some of that is like modern design versus what was considered like good design back in the 60s and 70s, and then into the 80s and 90s with the other shows. You can kind of see the influence of modern design on older stuff. And I think that that's true in general for a lot of things, right? Like you look at how Art Deco as a movement, like a design movement was, back in the 60s and then like 70s and that time, with disco and that stuff. And then, that's not, those sort of things aren't really in style today. And so cleaner lines, smooth design, that sort of stuff is a lot more prevalent. And now you can kind of see those influences working their way backwards on stuff that doesn't really fit that design, but people maybe wanting it to fit a little better.
Right. Oh, man. I never thought I'd hear the words Art Deco on a We Were Gamers podcast. I love this subseries.
Yeah. I think that's, it's just like those were kind of the influences on the original design of the ship, right?
Right, yeah.
And,
absolutely.
And then as they move forward, you got other kinds of, more interesting stuff in TNG when they started finally bringing out a lot more of the other races' ships, and then the movies when they started bringing out, the other races and their ships more prominently as well.
Beautiful. They're just pretty. They're pretty to look at. And, even the other races' ships sometimes are pretty to look at. A Borg cube is actually a very intricate thing to look at. Or,
oh yeah,
the Romulan warbird is like, what am I looking at here? This is a crazy, like, bendy thing. Or
yeah, and that Klingon bird of prey has a really like iconic look of like this like hawk swooping down
and
on
it's
you.
It's so menacing, right? Like in a non-traditional sense, in a like, this makes no sense. Why does this ship look like this? It's in space.
Yeah, like why does it have wings? That's
why
dumb.
does it have wings? Yeah,
but like
it's been encountered so many times, and the fascinating part about that is I don't think it existed until the movies came out.
I don't think so either. I'm pretty sure it's only from the movies.
And it became a huge part of DS9 used a bunch of them.
Yeah, they showed up throughout the rest of the shows, not infrequently after they became very popular in those couple movies where they featured from the original crew, right?
Right.
But they were not the ship you see all the time on TV, though, because very interestingly, the Klingon ship, right? The bird of prey is a pretty small ship in terms of size. Like, if you compare it to the size of the Enterprise or the size of the Romulan warbird, it's small. It's like closer to the size of something like the Defiant than it is something like the Enterprise. So that's not the Klingons' big fancy ship. The big fancy ship is the one you see on TNG all the time that looks like a ball with a hat on its head.
The Klingon battle cruiser.
Yeah, I forget, like D7 or whatever that thing is called. I don't know. It has a Klingon name.
The one from the Kobayashi Maru tests.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that one is their main ship of the line or whatever, but it looks horrible.
I am glad that we straight up agree on that. I have a note here that was like, when talking about Bird of Prey, mention how much I hate Klingon battle cruiser.
Yeah, it's bad. And
it's maybe the worst design in the show. It doesn't make sense.
It has this like engine section in the back with the two things kind of branched off on the side of it again, and then this long tube, and at the front there's this circle and a hat on top of the circle. And gosh, why?
If the nacelles are a weak point of a Federation ship, this is 10 times worse.
And thankfully, I guess, for all of Star Trek is that everyone has shields, because goodness, otherwise you just shoot like a gun.
Yeah.
Just a regular pistol at one of these ships, and it's just going to blow up.
Decompress the neck, and then bye-bye.
Yeah, it's a really nonsensical looking ship.
And there's a reason I think that it's kind of fallen out of Klingon lore, right? Like I don't think you've seen a Klingon battlecruiser in anything since TNG.
You see them in DS9 a bunch of times when the Klingons are at war with the Federation. Are with the Federation at war against the Dominion.
Right.
So you see him there, and Gowron has his, whatever the name of his special one is or whatever. But, you don't see him a lot, and wisely, probably.
It's unfortunate when you get stuck with certain things, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you compare it to, that one, and you compare it to, the Bird of Prey, which looks so iconic and cool, but, canonically is much smaller and therefore can't serve that purpose. And you're just bummed out. You're like, oh man, you had really good designers somewhere on Kronos, right? You had really good ones, and then that guy got fired after doing the first one, and he hired someone else, and he did a bad job.
Well, the battlecruiser's been around since the original series.
Okay. Well, clearly the guy they fired from doing the bad job, they hired someone better the second time. Then.
Well, that's what I want to point out, though, is so the Enterprise looks that way in the original series, and by DS9, you've had 1, 2, 3 Enterprises, a million other Federation ships, including the Defiant, the Reliant, the DS9 itself, the runabouts, the shuttlecrafts. Everything has changed canonically so much for the Federation in that span of time. Mm-hmm. And the Klingons have their battlecruiser, which is exactly the same as it was in the original series, and they've added the Bird of Prey. Where's the redesign? Why?
Yeah.
I don't know if they were trying to make a point, because maybe they are, about how Klingon culture doesn't shift as drastically as maybe the Federation culture does. And if so, that makes a lot of sense. But, even a military power does a redesign every 20, 30 years on stuff like this. So there should be at least a variation of the battlecruiser that's come through. But
yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible that these are the D8 battlecruisers instead of the D7 ones, but you can't tell the difference because it has a better Batleth training room inside or something, and you wouldn't know.
Yeah, but maybe it is, and the more I think about it, it makes a lot of sense if it were a reference to.
I mean, the Klingons are pretty rooted in tradition and all that kind of stuff, so they would be pretty into the idea of the stuff from our warrior past.
Right.
Is better.
And they, if you read a lot of the fiction and stuff about what happens inside of a Bird of Prey, which I think they're run by 15-person crews,
yeah, they're pretty small.
The engines and how those work and how hot they run and whether or not there's radiation leaks all over the place and stuff like that. And those ships are kind of interesting.
The Bird of Prey specifically, I mean, despite it looking so amazing and iconic, when they talk about the submarine aspect, the Bird of Prey actually acts like a real submarine in respect that it's invisible all the time, so it can sneak around the way a submarine can because it's underwater. It also has all these issues of the engines are super hot all the time, so you have to be kind of careful with how you pilot, just you can't go crazy in a submarine or you're going to cause too much noise and they'll find you. And, because all those issues where it has to decloak before it can shoot because of movie necessity.
Unless you're in the undiscovered country.
Yeah. And, all that stuff
and
essentially.
Then...
But, it gives it makes the, it makes that ship much more analogous to what a submarine would be than a lot of space fiction does with their submarine analogy. So I thought that was an interesting look at the bird of prey. Even though it looks nothing like a submarine, it does have some of those actual, small crews, close quarters, tight, cramped bridge kind of stuff.
And I know we've joked about the wings, and I complained that it doesn't have nacelles. Somebody's going to write in and tell me that, but they use the wings as blah, blah, blah. Yes, I know. They create the field using the wings.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure they're right.
It's just not, it's not the easiest explanation for something that could have been easier.
Yeah. And definitely what happened was someone made the design and then was like, how can we fit the tech to make this design? Right. It didn't go that way.
Anyway.
Yeah. Like, hey, what looks cool? They did that. And then they were like, how can we fit the story around this thing looking cool?
Yeah. Do you like the way the Federation headed with the flatter stuff like the Defiant and the Enterprise E?
It certainly they look more like what I would consider to be modern spaceships.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a problem with it in that respect. I think the Federation on a whole, and, well, I guess Starfleet in particular, kind of as the series got on, militarized a lot more.
Yeah.
That's sort of a reflection of the times, I guess.
Well, they had to, I guess. Yeah, they kept running into military problems. And they struggle with that story-wise. But, the ships start to get, quantum torpedo, full spread loadouts. And
we got a lot of guns on these ships now,
Whereas, TNG is like, should we shoot, I don't know, phasers? One torpedo? I don't think we should shoot. And then
half-power phasers.
Yeah, and then by the end, it's like, there's a Borg ship coming. Light it up, you guys, with 95 million quantum torpedoes.
Fire as many torpedoes as you can shoot quickly, please. And that's some of that is the signs of the times. Militarization is a big thing in the U.S. culture anyway, and so that's being reflected there. Also, it's the sign of hey, this is the direction this fiction went. It definitely got a lot more, militaristic and into battles and spectacle in that respect. So, hey, you want to show the more military side of things. In theory, the science vessels and stuff are still out there doing science stuff, but you sure don't see them because they don't have many guns, right?
True. Yeah. I kind of like them when they became kind of the stealth version of ships, right? Because the Federation supposedly can't use cloaking technology, even though they steal it sometimes to use it or whatever. I like that the Bird of Prey gave writers so many problems that they had to write into the Model UN or whatever that the Bird of Prey is grandfathered in, but nobody's allowed to use stealth technology anymore.
Yeah,
but they make these little ships that look stealth.
Literally the Model UN of the Federation, and everyone got together. It's like, stealth is cheating. Let's just not, you guys. And then the Romulans we'll use it. We don't care.
The Klingons are like, no, we still have these. We're not going to not use them. Okay, fine. So those are the only cloaked ships. Got it.
Yeah. And, silly. Whatever. But it is pretty funny. The bigger thing, is the ship design. It kind of has this boat-like look to a lot of them, right? We talked about how they seem like they're Earth boats transplanted up into space in some ways.
Sure.
The battles sort of play out like what you would imagine a naval battle to play out like as well, right? You do, everyone kind of circles each other and tries to shoot each other, line them up for a broadside, matey, kind of stuff.
They
right?
definitely lack. How do I put this? The Kelvin timeline battles are hither and yon laser shows, right? Where either the camera's going wild and you can't tell what the ship is doing because it's moving, woo, or in the Khan one, they just sort of static and there's missiles and lasers flying everywhere, and then the camera goes wild tracking the missiles and lasers. So I have no idea how to judge Kelvin timeline space battles. Enterprise or not Enterprise, Original and TNG, the ships basically don't move, right? Like they're just sort of there, and if they shoot at each other, they shoot at each other while standing still.
And a lot of that, you understand why, right? They're making a TV show. Those budgets are expensive, showing the ships flying around space. Those effects shots are like crazy expensive. So obviously they did as few of them as possible.
So the later series, you get into the ships fighting each other, and they just sort of kind of dogfight as you would expect inside of gravity.
Yeah, right. It's like, it's flying around as though this was, like atmosphere, right? It's making a banked turn and that kind of stuff.
Right.
When
attack pattern delta is maybe the wildest we get in terms of what we expect the ship to be doing. Maybe they're flipping over or doing something. Who knows?
Yeah. Making a handbrake turn.
Yeah. You really have to go to other sci-fi to get and I think maybe Babylon and Battlestar fight for the title on like, okay, roll the ship, like turn our other side over sort of stuff.
Right. And the
fighting in a dome.
Right. We could just go up.
Right. Or
kind of idea, right?
Yeah, or we can shift the battle to a different X or Y or Z here.
Yeah. Or the idea of like, well, I guess while momentum is a thing, certainly
direction is not.
Direction is not, right? So you could just point whatever way you want.
Right.
Your ship will take a little bit to bleed the momentum or whatever, but you can just like stop and turn around and go the other way. There's nothing stopping you.
Right.
From
as long as you don't overstress
kind
your ship, you can flip over and just go the other direction eventually.
And the only stress is the stress of how fast you were moving before, right? It's not like you have to worry about the air ripping off your wings.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen.
Sure.
It's just that if the wing, whatever is holding the wings on is weaker structurally than the center part, right?
Right.
So anyway, that, science, look, we can't apply science too hard here.
No, right, exactly. Yeah.
But I think it is interesting how that they continued that kind of naval tradition in sort of how they saw these ships out into, and in fact, isn't there a TNG episode where they literally are on a boat named the Enterprise? It's like a sailing ship, right?
That's the beginning of First Contact.
That's right. They're using the boat as like the metaphor for their...
Yeah, it's like a crew training thing, and Worf is getting a promotion or something, and they're using it as like rec time for the bridge crew.
And it's, but like the naval, aspect of that shows throughout all the way they're treating these ships.
Yeah. And each crew has their own version of, how they interact. Like you said, submarine crews, like big battleship crews, all those sorts of things, right? But back onto design, maybe a little bit more than
sorry, I sidetracked us.
No, it's like the mental nature behind the design. You have to think about like how they see these ships before you see how they design these ships, and it's interesting like to think about that stuff, because if you apply them to other races like the Cardassians, how do they see the Cardassians? Okay, well, they're like a warlike people, but they're also kind of snaky and sneaky. They look like snakes a little bit.
Yeah, they've got this very reptilian kind of...
I think it's the first
aesthetic
time the aesthetic of the people bleeds into the ships.
I don't know about that. I think that some of the other aesthetics of the races bleed into their ships before you see the Cardassians. Well, but it definitely shows a lot better in the Cardassian ships because they're so different.
Yeah. And do you like... I don't know. I can't decide this many years later if I even ever liked the Cardassian ships.
And they don't show up that frequently either.
Yeah.
They're really only in DS9.
And
bad.
You really... They're kind of interesting and cool because they're different, but they're also kind of bad.
Yeah. Yeah. The one Cardassian thing that everyone agrees looks really good is DS9, right? The space station, since they're the one Cardassians built it.
It's a fascinating space station.
It's really the best thing in Cardassian architecture and design.
It's way better than the Federation ones, which are literally like a poop smokestack.
Yes. Federation space stations look like weird, abnormally grown mushrooms.
Somebody in the design room was like, okay, so the biggest thing, they're not going to have nacelles because they don't move, but the biggest design element in the Federation is saucers. What if it was saucers all the way down?
Yeah, which just make it look like a weird mushroom. And you're like, okay,
yeah. All right,
I guess. Yeah, so there's a lot. Back to the Cardassians again, and you only see their ships maybe like a handful or slightly more times, and their architecture is so cool. You want to go, like, when they go to Cardassia for those few episodes every now and then. There's a lot of like really cool architecture and stuff there that you think like, oh, it really shows this like militaristic authoritarian society with all their like, angular buildings and their breastplates that are all crazy angles and stuff. But like their ships look kind of,
yeah, they look like a tow hitch with a earwig attached to them.
It looks like the bottom half of a ship meant to mate to the top half of a ship that looks cooler.
Yeah, it looks like the tail to a bigger ship.
Yeah,
I don't know what the deal is with that.
I do not know either.
Yeah, so I don't know. At some point when looking at all of these, I definitely picked out my favorite and my least favorite ship. Did you happen to come across like a, man, I really wish this was a design element more, or like, man, I really wish this didn't exist sort of things, or no?
Yeah, I definitely found some stuff that like I really liked and some stuff that I didn't. I don't know about like specific elements, but I definitely found specific ships where I was like, this is not and shouldn't have been a thing. And we did talk about, at least, we've talked about actually both of mine here a little bit before. I'll just start with, I really think that Klingon battlecruiser is bad.
It's maybe the worst capital ship in the... It's definitely the worst capital. It's beyond even some of the bad ships in Voyager that show up that are one-offs. I think the
bio ships and the other weird stuff that shows up later in Voyager. Yeah. That Klingon battlecruiser, for how much it showed up in TNG and DS9, gosh, it looks dumb.
Yeah, if you got a ship that's going to show up that much, that's the one thing they should have redesigned, right? Like, bad tast for sure.
Yes.
And the color, what is with, you've got this
green.
You've got green and red and like BA looking birds of prey that are out there. Yeah. And then you got these gray Klingon battle cruisers that look like they were matte painted for another color, right? It's like a bottom layer. Like a primer, and then they just never painted them.
They took like light green primer and sprayed it over them, and you're just like, "What is this, you guys?"
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a huge missed opportunity there to like color them up, make them look crazy.
Yeah, and there are other ships, Romulan ones and other races that other those minor like one-off races and stuff. Who you see the ships have like designs on the outside. They have patterns, they have color, and that kind of stuff. And like it's allowed, right? Of course, space doesn't care if you paint the outside of your ship or not. But like, if you have one and you want to make it look cool, like let's, spice it up a little bit. Draw some like sweet Klingon runes on it or something. They didn't even do that.
Yeah, Mike, that's definitely my least favorite capital ship. I also, I'm not a big fan of almost all of the Federation shuttlecraft, pretty much.
Yeah, so I didn't know if we were going to talk about shuttlecraft, but specifically I don't like any of the warp-capable ones.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. Okay, same page.
Yeah, the original design of the shuttlecraft is like, oh, look, it's this little mini box-like thing with like some nacelles on the side because that's how you go in space, apparently. Mm-hmm. And they just use it to fly up and down to the planets, and that's all right.
Yeah.
And then like sometime, I don't know when, after the original series, they decided, you know what, these things can do warp too.
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't get that.
I don't understand how there's space for that in that. But okay.
I really think almost all of them should have been early and late variations of like the Delta Flyer, pretty much.
Yeah, the Delta Flyer is like the best version of those things, but also like I get my problem with them more stems from the fact that like why can they warp? But I can get over that if I just look at the design of them. They just look so dumb.
Yeah. Why
like
can they
little
warp
squares.
is a good question. 'Cause we should talk about, but I would need to actually like rewatch episodes about like how warp works.
Yeah, and like I don't want to read a technical manual or anything, so I'm sure there's a reason. I just don't care.
You know, it's interesting in fiction this big, you kind of shouldn't bother with a technical manual because next episode of Discovery they could rewrite the whole thing.
Totally, and you know, and that's fine, right? But you know, the explanation is out there. I'm just curious as to how they justified it.
Yeah,
because man, warp core is such a big thing in the original series and in TNG, and they're like, oh well, maybe you could just make them smaller and then they don't warp as good. Is that how it works? I don't know.
But yeah,
so,
I especially don't like ships like the Runabout either for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. It has this like, oh, we're like a lifeboat on the side of this other thing kind of feel to them, and yeah, they feel bad for exactly that reason.
Okay, cool. We're all on the same page on that one. Any standouts for you?
I think my favorite, I have like two kind of really favorite ones. One from like a design perspective, and then one from like a coolness perspective. And I would say that the Romulan Warbird is very, very cool.
You're talking about the big green one.
The big green one,
not
right?
The
with
little
the two
original series ones.
No, I'm talking about the ones that show up in the movies and the Next Generation stuff with the sort of the two side wings.
I'm amazed by the fact that they wrote out those little ones completely, and then they only basically fly around in these warbirds. It's a very interesting choice, because I guess they have such a homogenous society, right, that they just like homogenized all the ships too. They're just like, nope, one ship, whole fleet, boom.
Yeah, they decided that like, oh, they're so secretive, we've never seen them before. Here they are. They've been around for hundreds of years. Don't worry about it. And just the design of how that ship looks, it's very different from a side profile from the front profile, right? The front profile, you get those like double wishbone kind of wings out to the side. If you look at it on the side, it's all very sleek and one piece kind of a thing. And the top, yeah. Oh man, it's a really cool looking ship.
And the front is so different than the rest of the body too, right? Like you've got this huge shape that, and this is one of the problems with it, right? Like, oh, it's so hard to hit from the front because it's got all these missing areas, and then you're like, but what if you just roll over the top?
Yeah.
But it's so cool. The front of it looks so awesome. That huge like beak on it, you know?
Right. Yeah. It definitely, you get the sense of it being bird-like in that way, right? It's got this huge kind of like,
you know what it reminds me of a little bit? From Watchmen. What's the guy's name? The Owl?
Owlman?
Owlman or whatever.
Night Owl?
Night Owl? Is that his name? I think it's Night Owl. Yeah.
I think it's Night Owl.
Yeah, but like Night Owl's costume is what that thing looks like to me.
A little bit, yeah.
We're like kind of, right? It's like over the top in that way. Kind of huge. Anyway, I think it's funny. But it's cool. I like it. And what was your other one?
I really like the Borg. I think the Borg designs are all really good in general. And the cube is such like an iconic idea of like this clearly evil yet like very mechanical and precise race of beings that are just out here to like do some really evil stuff in a very logical and bad way. And it's not necessarily that the cube is like very cool looking, although it is pretty cool looking, I think. It's just that it fits so perfectly with everything that the Borg is about. You see the cube, you immediately know, all right, these people are like robots or something, because no human would ever build something that looks like that.
Nice. It's just cool. The Borg ships are just cool. And the fact that they have like another ship inside of them, that They're well thought out.
Yeah.
I also kind of have two, because I had I love this ship, but it's not the coolest looking one. And I realized why I loved it was story and design elements of it. And then I have one that I just like is so iconic that I can't let it go. And that's the iconic one is the Bird of Prey. I think is just it's awesome to have a ship that is literally like, okay, well, our culture falls back on wanting to seek glory in these tin cans that are kind of death traps. And like the way that it looks when it warps, when the wings come up, the way that it looks when it lands, when the wings come up even further, the way that it looks when it's in combat mode, when the wings come down. And just, you know, like, okay, it's this tiny combat ship that maybe doesn't hold up to more than 1 or 2 torpedo hits. That just sticks out to me as like such a good design overall that like can't be replaced in a weird way.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the best designed and has the most like iconic look to Star Trek ships.
And they just lean into what that ship means with how it looks, right? Like it took on a different flavor because of how it looked. So I like that ship a lot. And then my other one's the Defiant. You can't say that it's like super aesthetically pleasing. It's just kind of a shape.
Mm-hmm.
But it began, I think, the flat ship trend, right? I think that was...
It was certainly the first one that we saw in fiction. And it was like, oh, it was some prototype or whatever. Right,
exactly. And it's been pressed into service and put out there, and it's a flat ship that they were designing for combat. They were like... The idea behind it, and the one that they should have stuck with, was that these were prepping for war. We don't want to re-enlist all our science vessels, which are ostensibly what Starfleet's about. We're going to design these warships. Like, that's all they're for. You can fit cloak drives to them silently because that's not legal. You know, they were flat. They looked like little snub-nose fighters, right? There's no saucer on it.
Right.
The nacelles are armored and still off to the sides, but now the nacelles are armored. You know, the bridge is not just there for everyone to shoot. It's also armored. It was such a
you don't just have like a sweet window out to the side where everyone knows to shoot.
Yeah, right, exactly. So to me, the Defiant was cool in how it looked, but not the coolest, but also cool in why it existed, and also started the trend of how ships were going to look, even though the Federation ships still had to have nacelles and saucers. I think that Defiant is responsible for a lot of design change in the Federation ships, and so I think that one stands out to me a lot too, just for being such a weird and iconic ship.
I agree. It is a very iconic look. And I think especially if you get a lot of good feelings for the Defiant if you watched through a bunch of DS9 and you came to love that show, like I know both you and I have. Yeah. So I understand getting kind of like, oh, I really feel good about this ship, especially when, you know, how unique it was at the time. When you first saw it, you're like, whoa, that's really different from what a starship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's it for? What does it do? Why does it look like that?
Totally.
I was curious because I started just flipping back and forth between pictures of it. Do you have a preference on the 1701 designs? Because there's like original design, and you could say modernized version of original red nacelle design. There's Kelvin original, which is like huge and bulkier version of like it looks beefier, it looks more roundy and bulbous, and it's got like little turrets all over it instead of the sleek original. Or there's also 1701A, like those 3 original crew designs, not B, C, D, E, any of those, but the original crew piloted.
Gosh, I don't think I remember enough about what the Kelvin design looks like to comment on it. I sort of have forgotten about that ship a lot. But I think probably, you know, the most, you know, the way I think of what the Enterprise looks like is probably, you know, the 1701 anyway. is how it looked in those movies, right? Like Wrath of Khan and...
So the blockier nacelles, the square nacelles, the armored-looking ones.
Is that what those ones look like?
Yeah, they're kind of like
really
squarish.
Don't remember.
And then the deflector disc changes from like a radio receiver to the just blue circle.
Yeah, I think that's the one that I remember
a
little better. And probably only because that's the one I was introduced to first. I definitely saw those movies before I saw the original series.
Oh, okay.
And I definitely don't think that I have seen every episode of the original series, although probably pretty close to it at this point. It is a very like iconic look, right?
Talking about this reminds me that the Enterprise B was an Excelsior design.
Yep, we never saw that.
Generations.
Hearing, didn't it blow up though?
No, in Generations, it didn't blow up. Just the side of it blew up, and then we never saw it again after that. But
right.
What's his name from Saving or Ferris Bueller was the captain.
Yeah. Well, Generations is a good movie.
I agree. And how do you feel about the overall Excelsior design? That kind of like flat top square nacelle thing.
Yeah, so the Excelsior is the first step along the let's make everything sleeker and eliminate this saucer section thing, right?
Definitely
if you
flatter.
Look at it has this much thicker, much more like the neck, right, is much thicker, much more connected than instead of slimming down and becoming this thin little connection to the engineering area down below, it's this wide, chunky kind of thing so that you can kind of make a flat S out of the whole ship. They're fine. I don't know. I don't have anything like particularly against them, but it is very clear that it's the first step along the path to where you would end up with the Enterprise E and the Defiant and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Right on. That was a lot of ship design talk.
Yeah. Yeah, the topics are vast and diverse out here in the vastness of space.
Well, that's it, man. We could go on forever, but I think we covered a huge range of things. I think we talked about Klingons and the Federation quite a bit. We didn't talk about any of the Dominion ships at all. But
yeah,
honestly, somewhat forgettable. Although they had that one that looked like a crab.
They have the Dominion is more notable for their color scheme,
purple.
Yeah, and like pinkish, than any of their ship designs.
Yeah.
And I think that if you ask someone, "Hey, what is a Klingon?" Someone who has seen any amount of Star Trek, "Hey, what does a Klingon ship looks like?" They're going to tell you the Bird of Prey, right?
Yeah. What's interesting about Voyager too is they went through probably 100 different ships that they brought in for that show because they had to keep encountering new ones, and yet there's none of them that were like, that's interesting.
I mean, by the end, they definitely had like 2 or 3 main series villains. You get the Kazon, and then you get that weird like biomechanical species, and then the Borg eventually. And yeah, it's not. Yeah, Voyager.
I don't know, man. The Kazon ships are not. They're not great.
No,
and that's for
man, they're not great
for a series villain. They're kind of like.
Yeah, and they were only around for a few seasons, right?
Yeah.
And then never heard from again, and never will be heard from again because they're too far away.
They look like somebody took like a Mon-Cal cruiser and stuck fins on it.
A little bit, yep. Just put a bunch of spiky bits all over us, like a torpedo-looking thing.
Yeah. Bummer. It's for a chance to encounter the Delta Quadrant, or like the ships were not crazy, and I don't know that you can make them super crazy.
Yeah.
But, yeah. All right. Well, we'll be back next month.
Yeah. We'll have another Subspace transmission.
Woo! All right. Where should people tell us what ships we missed?
If you want to tell us about the best ships that are out there and the ones we clearly didn't talk about.
Your favorite.
your favorite one. It's going to be podcast@wewergamers.com, an email address.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you can get us at wewergamers on Instagram and Twitter. We read those all the time. Also, our Facebook page is facebook.com/wewergamers. Give us a follow and a like on there. Give us those sweet reviews on iTunes and Google Play and wherever else fine podcasts are reviewed. And
if you got any suggestions for a topic for the show that you want to hear, shoot our way.
We are completely open to doing all kinds of topics on these. So if you got good ideas, please send them.
We didn't even talk about like the original design for what was the first ship called? The what's his name?
I don't even know what you're talking about right now.
I know. There's just too many things to remember, and it's too early in the morning. This coffee has not worked yet. Zephram Cochrane's ship.
Oh, yeah.
Man. These just go on forever with this topic. All right. We got to end it.
That's true.
And like the Vulcan ships. We didn't even talk about Vulcan ships either. Oh my gosh. Part 2.